Well, it may have taken ages, but some of you might remember that we made it all the way to the third entry in RE's live-action cinematic offerings, and we've seen a bit of an evolution so far. With the first two, it was clear that the intent was to mirror or at least mimic certain aspects of the games, but around the third one we entered this odd era where fans of Resident Evil have essentially stopped attending, and the films start becoming less about a video game series and more take place in their own kind of unique cinematic world. So it's gonna be a little hard to judge this one. I mean, what am I gonna say? Gee, this sure doesn't resemble Resident Evil very much? It's such an obvious take that it's almost not worth talking about. So instead, maybe I'll start grading these things on their own merit and not trying to hold them up to a standard that, let's be honest, they had no intention of living up to. Besides, I'll give you a little hint, they tend to fail on their own merits without needing any outside help. So why don't we jump headfirst into an RE film that I've never seen before and see if it holds up as its own action horror kind of deal. Oh, and by the way, these RE movie reviews are notorious for attracting the Content ID bots, so to avoid another copyright claim, I might need to do ungodly things to the footage in this video. If that ends up being the case, just know that I immensely apologize ahead of time. That's all side stuff though. What's really important is that it has been a very long time since I've said this, but ladies, gentlemen, welcome to the Resident Evil Retrospective. The last movie we covered here on the channel, Resident Evil Extinction, was actually slated to be the end of the series, something that makes a whole hell of a lot of sense when you consider that they essentially ended the world in that one and gave the already overpowered Alice character an army of her own clones. But never let it be said that the Hollywood machine is willing to sleep on any possible chance of revenue. RE Afterlife came to theaters about 3 years after Extinction and earned itself a nice $15 million budget upgrade, more than enough to make a solid action horror movie, right?
Is that any way to treat a lady?
Okay, so even a jaded Resident Evil fanboy like myself can admit certain things. Like, for example, this starting sequence is really cool. First we have this really great looking overhead shot of Tokyo, and then we're taken to the crossing outside of Shibuya Station. Here we have some awesome looking slow-mo shots showing a girl who's been infected, but the people around her aren't even paying attention, which does track with reality, as the last thing a commuter in Tokyo would be willing to do is stop their forward momentum and miss a train. So our girl spends a bit of time looking majestic in the rain, as we all love to do, until she pounces on a stereotypical salaryman, and we have this zoom out shot showing the whole of Japan losing power at the same time, which seems impossible, but then it expands to the world at large, so have fun trying to figure out how that happened. And then we're treated to the more than expected beginning exposition dump, which you might think is unnecessary now that we're 4 movies deep into this franchise, but when you make products for the lowest common denominator, this is just what you gotta do. But on the plus side, I have always loved this kind of line in a zombie movie.
Everybody died. Trouble was, they didn't stay dead.
That little verbal introduction sends us right back to Tokyo, where an Umbrella employee is taking out zombies with a few buddies until they themselves are taken out by an unseen force. Which leads us into a really cool looking CG wireframe of the Umbrella complex under Tokyo, and after a few establishing shots of chaos breaking out, we get some Wesker action, and I gotta say, he plays a damn good Wesker. That just goes for the looks and mannerisms though. The voice is definitely not there, but hey, I'll give him points for trying. So then Alice shows up and takes out an entire room filled with trained professionals, all armed to the teeth, but that is expected at this point. And speaking of expectations, we are treated to some of the absolute worst wire shots I think I've ever seen in a movie with this kind of a budget. Now, I will admit I have always had issues with wire food not looking good to me, but come on, The Matrix came out almost 8 years prior to this, and they were able to make wire scenes that looked great with about the same budget. That all being said, there is some awesome stuff going on here, which kind of tracks with the rest of the series, having some stunts that work really well and some that just flat out look amateur. Once it looks like her goose is cooked, Alice whips out the OP psychic powers she has off and on throughout the series and gets taken out by a single soldier, which is this movie's cue to send in the clones. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, a series of Alice clones rampaging through an Umbrella facility with guns akimbo is just cool on its face, flat out. Plus, I'm a big fan of Wesker's managerial style. Very thorough. Now, I fully know I'm being nitpicky here, but the soldiers in this scene know these two Alices are behind these two pillars, but when they both come out of cover standing straight up and showing the broadest side of their bodies as targets, aka the center mass pros are trained to shoot for, these guys are still shooting dead center at the glass behind them? Am I starting off on a bad foot here, or is the movie? Either way, I don't think anyone is going to argue that this slow-mo CG shot of the two jumping through this window doesn't look like garbage, and again, this is roughly the same budget as the first Matrix film. Luckily, the scene that follows where the two Alices start picking off Umbrella security while falling what seems like roughly a million bajillion miles is stylish as hell and one of the few non-traditional action stunts in this series that actually worked the way it was intended. So one Alice makes it down there alive and gets taken out by Wesker, who, if you haven't noticed yet, has been double-fisting Desert Eagles like a goddamn boss. But it turns out Alice was ready to go out in style, and somehow, with just 2 of these grenades, creates an explosion that would put Timothy McVeigh to shame. Then Albert, cool as an entire metric ton of cucumbers Wesker, makes his way to an escape chopper and pulls the old RE self-destruct move on the Alice clones, which looks really great. So now, with just one singular Alice left, the two face off, but the psychic super soldier over here somehow didn't react to this move and gets injected with some substance that will neutralize the T-virus cells in her body, which allows Wesker to rip into her with one mammoth of an ass beating. I'm talking very, very crunchy levels of satisfying here. But before we move on with the movie, let's pause here for a second and just think about what just transpired. These guys genuinely spent 3 movies turning Alice into the most self-insert Mary Sue in film history, but only just now realized they were writing themselves into a corner. Instead of having to pull some contrivance out of the inner reaches of your ass, maybe just slowly develop a character into something more powerful. And the same goes for the clone army. Now, I will admit the ending of 3 that saw Alice discovering all these clones was really damn cool, but they couldn't have lasted more than 6 minutes in the next movie? I mean, come on. Well, like I said, Extinction was supposed to be a bookend for the series, which would explain why they had to work so hard to immediately undo all the progress they made in that movie. That being said, you can explain the reason behind it all day, it just doesn't make for good writing. Okay, so going back to our little tussle, Alice thanks Wesker for making her human again, and he realizes that he's been stomping a mud hole in a now defenseless 108-pound woman instead of flying his aircraft, resulting in a pretty wicked-looking action scene. So, no prizes for predicting that Alice would make it out alive, and the next scene gives us a recap for the movie, making a total of 2 so far, which is a rather bold choice in my opinion. I mean, I'm not saying the general audience for this film would need the plot recap less than 15 minutes after the last plot recap, but I guess these guys are. So Alice knows how to fly a plane apparently, and makes her way to the spot in Alaska from the last movie, which was rumored to be infection-free. After landing, Alice comes across a whole lot of planes and helicopters who apparently had the same idea as her. Having nothing much else to do, she sits down to record a vlog and comes across Claire from the last movie, who's being controlled by one of those things from RE5. Don't worry though, a quick kick is enough to remedy that situation. Which is probably a great time for me to show my latest self-help book, Kicking All of Your Problems in the Solar Plexus, The Avalanche Review's Solution. When she comes to, it seems like Alice snatched that little spider thing off of her chest, but Claire still has no idea who she is. Then the movie tries to drop the subtle, almost imperceptible hint that someone's watching them. Since Arcadia was a huge bust, the two decide to start hitting major cities on their way south, and Claire starts being able to communicate again, which I guess is nice. And the next scene is one that really sends people over the edge, and in my opinion, rightly so. Like, you decided a majority of the world had become a desert in the last movie. Why go back on that? I mean, it was a dumb idea in the first place, but you can't just throw an entire established concept like that away without an explanation. Or, I guess normally you can't, but again, lowest common denominator. Now, all that aside, these shots of LA on fire were particularly amazing to look at. No joke, I really love this post-apocalyptic things have been destroyed kind of feel. It's just awesome. And while doing some looking of their own, the two spot a few survivors in a sea of zombies, which leads us to another compliment. Like I said in my last video, the walking corpses in RE Extinction looked absolutely terrible for the most part, with a quantity over quality type of approach, but these guys look nice and gross, just like I like them. So Alice decides to land on the roof of the building they're holed up in, and this leads to a surprisingly tense action scene that I can admit made me a little stressed out. And what better way to end a really cool stunt than with a equally cool one-liner?
Nice landing.
I think technically it's called crashing.
Afterwards, Alice starts with the introductions, but it seems like these guys also got the message about Arcadia and thought Alice was sent from there. After some discussion, it's revealed that Arcadia wasn't a town in Alaska at all, but instead a huge ship that just so happens to be parked outside of their current position. Their idea is that the ship must have started in Alaska and moved its way down the coast picking up survivors, but I get the feeling we're in for a stereotypical Umbrella tier plot twist. And again, we get the satellite view of things. You know, something tells me Wesker lived through that crash, and we're gonna see these two ideas sort of get wrapped together. Oh, and it looks like zombies can tunnel now, which is way more terrifying than I'd like to admit. So we get a little tour and find out we're smack dab in the middle of a maximum security prison, apparently in a cell block that was barricaded off from the rest of the place. And now that the rest of the cast is getting familiar with each other, I gotta say the score in this movie is leagues above the last one as far as atmosphere is concerned. Afterlife has these perfectly dark and really tense compositions where Extinction just sort of sounded like an action movie, which is odd because the music would have you believe there would be more of an emphasis on horror this time around, but I checked, and while there are zombies in the first 5 minutes of the movie, it takes another 25 minutes till you see them again. And just in case I need to remind you, that's in a movie where they have taken over the earth. So Alice heads downstairs and meets this movie's version of Chris Redfield, who's been wrongfully imprisoned, and Chris gives her a very Romero-esque verbal recount of past horrors. Honestly, as much as I don't like this movie, it sure as hell is trying its hardest to change that. That Romero-style verbal recount of a zombie attack, it's like a cozy sweater, it just feels right on me. And then Alice whips out a weapons cache that looks like it would fit in much better sitting in some neckbeard's room right next to a nondescript early 2000s anime wall scroll. So it looks like this movie is continuing with the franchise tradition of one step forward and about 90 million steps back. Later on in the night, we get some foreshadowing of the burrowing zombies starting to make their way in, and we get another cool shot of LA on fire, as well as the movie's rendition of the Executioner from RE5, which I have to say, despite me not really giving two shits about him as a video game enemy, you really gotta admit they did an amazing job transitioning him to the silver screen. On the negative side, the movie did rob us of a possible Alice shower scene, but on the plus side, old perverts finally getting the representation they deserve. That's called progress, people. So yeah, we're dealing with RE5 style Magini, and again, I just do not care for these guys. I've explained about a million times why I prefer traditional zombies to the whole intelligent parasites controlling dead bodies and making them do really complicated things, so I won't bore you with all that, but I will give it to these guys, they pulled off a decent look for these things. So after their run-in with the Magini, I don't know how to listen, hopefully you know exactly what I'm talking about. The survivors decide to let Chris out, and after getting manhandled by his amnesiac sister, he lays out a plan that might let the group escape their predicament, but not before the Executioner shows up. And at this point, you really gotta start asking yourself a question. Who in the hell is making this big of an axe for this guy? I mean, if it was an Umbrella experiment, they're not exactly shy about outfitting their creations with firearms, right? And while this guy here flails like an absolute sissy for some reason, Chris and Alice head down to the basement, which has been flooded, and it's here when I realized I really don't like the cool guy voice that Chris's actor is forcing for some reason. Physically, he looks like an okay stand-in for Chris, I guess. I mean, he could use another 120 pounds of pure muscle, but you know, he's not terrible. I just really can't get past this stupid, I've got a tough guy whisper all of my lines thing that he keeps doing.
Where do you think you're going?
So the crew heads down the elevator shaft, and I have just always hated scenes like this. I might have a fear of drowning, I'm not sure, or it could come from growing up in South Florida, a place where this isn't even the third guy saving an animal from an alligator news article that I've seen in my life. Either way, I just can't stand the whole loss of visibility and not being able to breathe trope. Then Chris throws a flare down a hallway, which might help with visibility for a few seconds until the sulfur fumes start making it damn near impossible to keep your eyes open. A dumb move that might have pissed me off if they didn't immediately one-up it. So I'm no firearms expert, far from it, but I assume lighting a flare in a room filled to the brim with combustible ammunition, you know, maybe not the best idea. Then we go back to check on the rest of the group, and the dickhead who was obviously going to betray everyone at some point does, followed by a scene where Claire and this guy push a cop car up to the gate to keep the Executioner from beating the doors down, but stop like 3 feet away for some reason. Listen, I get this was probably a very complicated shot, having to direct this many extras and actors at once, but you couldn't have at least hidden this with camera work. And you know, now that I'm thinking about it, why did the dickhead have to kill this guy? The goal was to steal this plane, but he could have just left and done that. There was no need to off some guy who literally did nothing to you and showed no signs of stopping you from taking that plane. And also, why not take your buddy? It's a two-seater, remember? Well, these and many more questions need to be put aside because this place is flooding with zombies or Magini, or does it really even matter when they're just going to retcon them out of existence in the next one? On the plus side though, we get an awesome scene out of this with everyone just capping deadheads and Alice blowing shit up, followed by an emotional roller coaster of a stunt that I just had to talk about in length. Alright, so let's hammer this out in a linear fashion. So Alice jumps off the building while leaving explosives behind. Awesome. Zombies follow her off the roof? Even cooler. What else you got? What's that? A killer explosion shooting corpses across the LA skyline? you know damn well I'm on board. But what in the hell is this? It looks so damn stupid. Oh, I'm sorry, are we right back to being awesome again with no warning? Honestly, this scene gave me whiplash. And listen, I know I'm being an ass here, but either she has developed some kind of super speed we don't know about, or these are some of those really slow, not breaking the sound barrier type of bullets you hear about sometimes. And once again, we're right back up with a hell yes. Jesus, I really don't know where I stand with this one. For every stupid amateur level stunt they pull, they come up with some really great ideas. The movie keeps hitting these really high peaks and then these really low valleys, and just like that, as I'm talking, we are back to being fucking awesome again. I genuinely don't know how to feel right now. On one hand, the idea of watching Milla Jovovich spin kick a 9-foot tall guy with nails in his face, well, it's kind of dumb. In motion though, it's executed cool as all hell. And those of you who saw this in theaters probably know what's going on here with all these shots of stuff coming straight at the camera, but for the rest of you, this movie was filmed during the garbage era where 3D was all the rage. You remember that technology that halved the brightness and resolution of your display for absolutely no gain anywhere else? Well, on the plus side, this film handles 3D much better than other stuff from its time, so only minor points taken off there. But major deductions for not making this look as sweet as it should have. And I guess this guy's weakness was slow-mo scenes that go on too long. Listen, I take back my comment from earlier, by the way, this is pretty shameless. So the rest of the guys are making their way through the tunnels dug by the Magini, and I gotta say the hanging skin was a very nice touch, and they make their way into a sewer or something. Luther gets grabbed, and with no transitional shots whatsoever, our guys just speed off towards the Arcadia in a boat they got from... your guess is as good as mine. Alice, Claire, and Chris explore the boat, and old Jared gets proven clairvoyant when they find out Umbrella's behind this. Claire finally gets her memory back, sort of, and the three walk straight into what they all recognize is a trap. Trap or not though, this is a really cool looking set and really fits the movie's version of Umbrella. Plus Kmart's back, and you might be wondering who that is. Well, she was given a total of 4 lines in the last movie, so how could they not bring her back? So it looks like these people were being stored with those mind control things on their chest, but not all of them stayed that way. And here Alice notices a blood trail that just flat out didn't exist a few seconds ago, and comes across a self-destruct type of deal. I wonder if that'll come into play at some point. Man, there we have it, the Big Wesker Reveal. I gotta wonder why they went with brown for his outfit though. The black threads from 5 weren't the coolest thing in the world, but they read more like the Matrix and less like Midnight Cowboy. So a fight breaks out and this happens, which is pretty sweet. Then Wesker pulls some of those Code Veronica moves that everyone loves but some of you guys hate for some reason, and it's like a 50-50 ratio of cool stuff versus poorly done CGI or wire work. And just like that, the two siblings are now locked in these containers, and apparently Chris has had a lifelong dream of losing his hearing based on how willing he is to shoot a gun inside of an actual echo chamber. Then we go back to dope-ass action for a second until Alice gets shivved and then Wesker also gets shivved. And it turns out everything Umbrella creates is weak to sawed-off shotguns, which kind of makes you wonder how the hell the outbreak got past Texas. Which leads to Alice picking up the tablet thing to let her friends out, and they already have profile pics of them standing in that facility. Like, come on, really? And would you look at that, Wesker's trying to show off all the space he's freed up in his skull, and the Redfields proceed to satisfyingly fill him with holes, but you knew we weren't going to end this RE film without a self-destruct sequence. Wesker, who's surprisingly chipper for a guy who just got his head hollowed out, puts himself on the receiving end of that explosion. Oh, and Luther lived, if you cared about that.
Star power, bitches.
And right at the end, Umbrella shows up in force and we're left with a relatively weak cliffhanger and a dope-ass A Perfect Circle song. That is, unless you sit through the credits, where you're treated to a scene of Jill Valentine making her triumphant return to the series and absolutely spilling out of her outfit. Nice touch. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I'm a little torn here. Resident Evil Extinction is a cheap, terrible thrill ride. Nothing out of the ordinary for a summer blockbuster, but this one here was really frustrating for me. It had so many cool ideas going on, but either failed to capitalize on them or executed them terribly. Like I already said, the stunt work and action sequences in this film are equal parts lame and pulse-poundingly cool, which causes a bit of confusion. Like, if you just pulled off an awesome stunt 1 second ago, why follow it up with one that's almost amateur in appearance? For example, that spin kick to the face was masterfully done, but they follow it up with a scene that is 2 straight, uninterrupted minutes of slow motion. And not like really cool action movie slow-mo, like Claire running in a straight line slow-mo. At the start of the movie, the wire work was so bad I just assumed the budget was small as hell, but there are definitely parts that disprove that. It genuinely felt like there were 2 different directors running this production, one who knew what they were doing and the other, well, let's be fair, was probably Paul Anderson. And yeah, maybe he wasn't in the director's chair for the last 2 films, but I can't shake the feeling that he had a lot of input into some of the action sequences. And if you're having trouble reading between the lines there, that's because they're awful. So I hate to end the same way that I started, but I really did come into this movie with the expectation that it would resemble Resident Evil about as much as it resembled Gone with the Wind. So I absolutely can confirm that if you watch this movie as a fun little action flick, you'll probably end up liking it. Some of the stunts are just flat out awesome, and the others probably would have been too if they were being performed by a crew or being thought up by a director who knew how to do that. The story is dog shit, and literally everything that was set up in the previous film minus Claire and Kmart has been totally rewritten, but honestly, can you blame them? Let's be fair, it was a trash movie, and it's not like this one isn't, but I get the feeling they understood what this was and had a little fun with it. I was warned by a not insubstantial amount of people that these movies would wear away at my soul as I entered this part of the series, but to be honest, if they keep things like this, I can see myself at the very least being interested. Sure, Resident Evil Afterlife is garbage, in a way, but it's the kind of garbage you can put on when you've got a group of friends over and need something to glance at while you're yelling at them about proper retro video scaling, or whatever normal people do with their friends. So while I can't in good conscience recommend this one, I can say I at least had a little fun with it. Did it shit on the games that spawned it? Well, of course, but you guys already knew that. No one should be going into any of these movies expecting accuracy or good filmmaking for that matter. They are schlock, and maybe that's not the best thing to be, but I guess there's a time and place for schlock too. So if you're asking me if this is a terrible movie or an awesome movie, I gotta say, yes. And no, I do not plan on being more professional in the future. Speaking of the future, I will have more of these RE movie reviews coming your way soon, so stay tuned, and here's hoping I see all of you guys again right here on the Resident Evil Retrospective. Hello, how goes it, fellow cinephiles? If you get into movie reviews regarding video game movies, whatever, I'm going to have some more stuff linked on screen here, and if you want to support me cranking out more of these babies, you can check my Patreon out. If that's not your thing, I have some killer merch up at my Teespring store, so maybe give that a look, and if you said no to all those options, well, I really don't think we could be friends anymore. Alright, peace out, guys.